Hey everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. This week we are keeping things fairly simple, doing something that I didn't really expect to share, and we're drawing an environment. It's something that has begun as a practice, recorded mainly for review later if I wanted to see how I did certain things, or if I decided later in the process that I would be sharing it after all. You see, I actually have been working on another painting a lot in the last 2 weeks. And I originally thought that it would be done in time, or that it wouldn't take as long as it is. Yet, evident by this, it wasn't the case, and I was also getting a bit frustrated with it, since the process isn't going as smoothly as I tend to see it go. So then, here we are. I decided that I would turn attention to this, and a few other ideas sat waiting for exploration, as I kind of have a batch of sketches and ideas that are waiting to be fully developed. This idea is one of those. One of a fair few, and simply the one that I felt would be the most fun to work out at any given moment. Now, most of these sketches, I figured that I would record the process for the event that I chose to share them, yet I didn't think that I would actually end up giving them their own videos, and this was one that I was fairly certain wouldn't be shared in this manner. Yet, I then had a lot of fun with it, and the outcome was fun by the time that I finished, despite a fair bit of back and forth here and there. So then, as this is a bit of a shorter one, let's just look at the drawing itself. This one began with the idea of a secret, as this was the prompt that I was working from. I had been sketching it with the intent to kind of generate a group of ideas for the prompt, wanting to really look at the various ways that this could be taken, even with just simple notes made. Yet I found that, after this one idea was sketched, I didn't have many ideas outside of this for the prompt at hand, and I ended up staring at the screen blankly for a fair bit, before kind of accepting that this was the only idea for this moment. Rather than leaving it, I set it up in its own little file and progressed the idea as I knew I could experiment a bit with it and with what was present. I will want to iterate this quite early here too. This drawing was experimental all the way through, and it was very open to shifting and change as I went along with it. I used this as a break from fussing over and stressing over the details of a painting, and I was just trying to do something without as much worry than the other thing that I had been working on. The differences here though started from the very first prompt, since the painting is more about expression and feelings of being open and free. It looks in the sky and such. This one was supposed to be ideas based on a secret, so the prompt works as a break in this sense. I mean, I didn't just kind of get this prompt for this reason, it is part of something else, but to mention that something else in any more detail would kind of classify as spoilers. So let's get back on track here. The sketch was looking at this idea of someone kind of prying to work out what is being kept secret from them. I had no ideas of what to draw about someone keeping a secret, other than two people whispering about something, or maybe drawing a scene that is often kept secret. Maybe like a surprise party or something else. These just felt a little bit too on the nose though with the prompt. I like this idea that the viewer is almost the one looking into matters that they shouldn't be, being somewhere that they shouldn't be, and looking through a lock to see what is behind. My logic here is that a lock tends to be designed to do one of two things, to either keep people out or to keep people in. This one was very much looking at the out focus of this point. A locked door can have anything behind it, and with no indication like a sign or something as to what is behind it, can be quite an interesting secret to keep. Naturally, I then had to work out what would actually be behind the implied door and lock, and whether I would go for a typical answer like a bedroom or an office, or if I wanted to go a bit more fantasy with matters at hand so I could fully deliver on things coming out of the lock if I wanted to at a later point. Now, I am fairly sure that I don't need to patronise you by stating which of the routes I end up taking. Choices like this are fairly clear from the get-go, since I often start with the sketch done. I mainly tend to start these videos with the sketch being done, since that is the stage with the most back and forth, a lot of me staring at the screen, or kind of just restarting it over and over again until I'm happy. I also end up with at least one iteration of the sketch that always looks as if I'm trying to go for a more horror route of the drawing, just by the few mistakes that I make here or there. I am getting sidetracked, however. I ended up going down a fantasy route since the forest is more fun. It's more active, and it's also simply more preferred by me to one of the more dull options at hand. I could have done an office or an interior, but I didn't want to, and the idea of a secret garden or an unnatural forest was way more enticing. I could do the river and the tree, and I could build up a sense of the environment whilst messing with it and what I would usually do. I instead found that I could see it in a more practice thing, and I could kind of focus on enjoying myself with it whilst experimenting and just doing because it was fun. I didn't have to worry about anything within the other painting, and I didn't even have to look at things close to it, which was a certain perk for this moment. So, with the sketch established, I had to argue with the colours and work out which direction I would be taking it. I kind of had the first crossroad of a natural palette or a more fantasy palette. Going fantasy would let me look more at pinks and purples, and maybe a few of the darker blues as well. Yet going for a more natural palette wouldn't close off too many avenues either. I had the obvious choice of a green palette, and to make the area look more lush and more alive. Yet I could also have gone for a more autumnal theme, and focus on red, yellow or orange. I could have changed my mind entirely too, and gone with a pale blue theme in a more natural direction, and kind of made the environment more wintry and snow-covered. This time though, I settled on doing the more obvious option, as I felt that this environment would benefit from feeling more alive than something else. Autumn could have been cool, could have had its own benefits and something that I explore another time. Yet I wanted something that was closer to spring and a bit closer to the ideas of an environment in bloom and growth, more than the themes of autumn as it gets closer to winter. I also think that part of this is being influenced by the arrival of spring here and the sunnier days that we're having every now and then. But the green was a palette that I was enjoying this time, even though I tend not to really favour it. I also didn't want to get stuck focusing on ideas of colour and lose my experiments with the brushes that I was going for or the fun that I had been having, so the green just made the most sense. From there, I went with it all and I tried to see what would happen. I kept myself from fussing too much about the palette, and I tried not to look at it until everything was in place. And I just went until the flat colours were done, whilst looking more at the image overall rather than in small segments. I mean, yes, I zoomed in to colour various areas, yet I tried to continuously zoom back out to see all of it at once before making any judgments on how it would look or how it would end up. Sometimes I do tend to change things repeatedly before looking overall, so I kept that in mind this time, just to kind of see something in its entirety before ruling it out. However though, that then does bring us into the details here. Ironically enough though, the first detail that I want to cover is actually one that I removed very early on, and I don't think I ever ended up actually adding it. I mean, I added them in a new layer at the end of the sketching phase, then I turned off that layer once they were planned, and I worked on the rest of the image before deciding that the detail wouldn't be missed, or that it wouldn't at least add anything to the overall outcome. This was actually a group of people in the scene. I think in total it would have been maybe 3 people, or 2 at the very least. There was one sat under the tree, sitting and reading. Another one was splashing in the small stream. Then there was also another sat with the back to the camera, as they were kind of looked as if they were having some sort of picnic and they were sat on a blanket. I added a basket for them and, at some point, even sketched in another person with their back to the lock, as if they were sat talking with one another. All in all, it was a pretty busy environment compared to what I normally do, and there were plenty of things that they were doing. Yet that didn't feel right. And it didn't feel right the more that I worked on it, and the longer that this idea sat. Even when I stopped working one session and stepped away, thinking of the drawing didn't include these people using the space in this way. It didn't include them at all. It was always somewhere that I thought of without people, something untouched and existing and peaceful. So I chose not to include them in the earlier phases, with the knowledge that I could always go back and change my mind to add them in later. I'd just be drawing over things, but it's digital, so it doesn't really matter too much. To this very point, I could still change my mind and go back in to edit the original file, and I'd just then end up with multiple versions of this drawing that I can keep as I wish. Yet, even in saying all of this, I did try off camera a few more sketches of where they may go and what it may look like. I tried looking at maybe just the person under the tree and how that may look. Still quiet and peaceful, but someone relaxed in the space. I then tried pairing it with the person splashing in the stream, when they alone felt a bit strange and almost isolated. They gave both the impression of calm, but also something fun, and also the feeling of being free. Two people using the space how they pleased, and clearly enjoying themselves. It was also just a little bit of not what I wanted, and it didn't look right. I instead redirected myself, and I tried the two on the blanket alone. Two people enjoying the space as someone looked on. It read as if the two were keeping their meetings a secret, and it added a fun layer to this story, but again, I wasn't really overly excited for the idea, and I knew that I could finish the drawing without it. However, if I were to go back and add something in, it would very likely be this pairing. For now though, I am simply happy, and I enjoyed this a little bit more as a bit of environment practice. So the second detail is then something that I actually kept in and could include. Well, in truth, I doubt I could have even removed it if I wanted to, as I kinda needed it to keep the drawing a bit more on theme, and to keep the trend of a secret going. This is the lock shape that borders the drawing and gives the impression of looking through the keyhole to try and see what is on the other side. The impression of trying to pry through a locked door. It was the start of the idea and the most consistent thing all the way through in all the different variants. I changed the decorations of it, planning originally for a mass of bushes and leaves to be pouring out of the lock, rather than something like the vines that I ended up with. Yet it was often a change for the benefit of the overall drawing and the focal point overall. I also changed the colour of the border once or twice here and there, starting with a stronger blue to the shape, yet changing my mind when it came to shading this area at the very end, since I wasn't entirely sold on the look of it and I wanted something a little bit darker, but I also still wanted a touch of the colour still present. I think though, whilst I will come back to the vine details, one of the most subtle changes I made to the lock shape had been to use a Gaussian blur on it, to slightly soften the edges of the inner line, whilst also not overdoing it. This, with the bits of light added around the shape's edge as well, kind of helped it shape the image and guide the eye towards the environment within it. And it was also kind of standing more as part of the drawing and not just a cutout slapped over top. In the original route before shading, the lock was almost placed over top and not integrated into a single coherent image, and it just wasn't fully believable. The light looked like it was coming from the other side, and the blur kind of softened the focus on the keyhole shape, and it instead made it look like the eye and the viewer was kind of looking beyond it that little bit more, which I enjoy. This is also why I changed the greenery coming out of the lock itself. I didn't blur this detail since it felt like it wouldn't add much when blurred, and would in fact only take away from the drawing. Yet I did keep it simple compared to what my original plan had been. This will also be the final detail of the drawing that I want to discuss before wrapping up here. The vines were added since I wasn't sure if I would build up the bushes and falling plants over them, using the vines as a guide. But I also wanted to see something how it would help guide the eyes inwards. All of the vines come out from this one area, being the keyhole, and they all kind of turn towards the shape and the forest within, which, overall, ended up helping guide the eye towards inside the shape and the forest, without there being much else going on that competes for attention. By this, they were a lot less distracting. The bushes I'd planned would have been the worst choice of any in this drawing. The parts at the top would have fallen into the image whilst also expanding upwards, which would have ended up obscuring the top of the keyhole, and it would have also ended up obscuring the tree at the centre of the back layout. At the sides, the keyhole would again be almost entirely obscured, and the falling leaves would have kind of been only included to fill negative space in the darker sections of the keyhole, and it wouldn't have added anything to help guide the eye back in towards the work, and it certainly wouldn't have enhanced anything. It would distract, and it would have likely made it harder for me to start to like this image. And that was just simply how it was. Comparing this to the vines and the flowers that I ended up with, they're simple with just enough colour that it can attract attention and it can stand in the image, but it does so without competing or stealing from anything inside the lock. It also helps that the flowers show up inside the forest or the garden, and that the green of the vines is also very present within the focal point's colour palette. Yet this all brought it together in ways that I was hoping for. In the same breath, the flowers are simple and not overly detailed. Part of why I didn't feel the need to blur them, since they weren't competing in this sense for attention either. And this is very much the same for the leaves. A lot of the leaves were thicker lines or slightly rounded marks that I didn't overly work on. Adding too much would have fallen into the same trap as the bushes. It would have looked odd due to how detailed they were, especially when you're meant to be looking past these into the environment behind. The drawing itself is also fairly simple. The shading wasn't too much inside the lock, and it's all relatively simple compared to some of my other work that I have also done. It meant that the details of the foreground had to be rather unremarkable and straightforward as well. Now, if inside I decided that I was going to detail every single blade of grass and everything in there, going as far as to make a photorealistic tree, then yes, I would have had to do more work on the outside of the lock as well, but this simply wasn't the case. Now, I also want to just clarify here though, it is simple, direct, and overall something that I did for fun before detail or fuss. I didn't go in and draw rocks in the dirt and roots coming out of things and all sorts of little details that, yes, normally I would be quite inclined to add, but I just didn't see the need for it this time. This one was meant to be experimental, it was meant to be for me, and it is still for me. It was a mess around, it was a play, and it was something that I could do for fun, without worrying too much about those details and small things here and there. I shared it because I liked it, and I enjoy this drawing myself. It makes me happy before anything else, and that's really the only goal of this drawing that I had. I like drawings such as this when I have other projects going on as well, as they're a breather for a short while, and they're a distraction as much as I need it to be. Something like this where I can just focus on having fun and enjoying things whilst making small improvements kind of lets me get to thinking about other things and other ideas that I may be leaving at the side, or also get me thinking about projects that I might be a little bit stuck with at the moment. So something like this can often be rather important for me. It lets me be creative without demanding too much of my time or my attention. It's also just a fun drawing and an idea that I had fun with. I'm very likely to revisit this if I ever wanted to at a later date as well. And I have plenty of drawings like this recently in my batch of sketches that I am looking forward to giving the same amount of attention, if not a little bit more. Anyway though, that is all for today, and thank you so much for watching. It is a bit of a shorter video here, but it was fun, which is all that matters to me, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well. If you did, have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. For now though, goodbye!